What's up, everybody, and welcome back for a Round 2 NHL Playoff pod. And the NHL playoffs are so great that there's a total chance that I might have only gotten 4 series right in the entire first round. It's really great how random hockey is, and I don't mean that in a sarcastic sense at all. I actually appreciate how many upsets there were. It's very interesting to see certain teams make it to the second round that you might not have seen in other circumstances. So I'm going to keep my really crappy bracket in the background so you can see how awful and wrong it was. And I am recording this before the conclusion of the the Ducks Predators series, and that's because they're starting playoff games tonight for some reason. Tampa Bay and the New York Islanders play this evening, and I just don't understand why they do that, because they do it in the NBA too. I don't understand why they have series start when other series haven't ended. So I'm gonna give 2 different sets of predictions if it's necessary for that set of games. So let's get underway. So I'd say the big domino that fell in the first round was the Kings getting eliminated, and that really, and the Blackhawks as well, that really kind of opens up the title race, because out of the 4 teams in the West, or the 5 teams, I guess, because Nashville and Anaheim, out of the 4 teams that remain, I don't believe any of them have made a Stanley Cup final in recent memory, meaning in this past decade. And I don't know if San Jose's ever made a Stanley Cup final. I'm not super up on my hockey history, but none of those teams have been really well, I guess the Ducks, if the Ducks made it, they were a Stanley Cup final, I believe, 10 years ago. It really kind of opens up the Western Conference with the Kings being gone, because I think the Kings were the odds-on favorite and the Blackhawks were second in most people's eyes anyway. I didn't look at any sort of sports books or anything like that. So, I don't know. The West is very wide open. So I'm going to talk about the West first, because I think the West has a chance for some crazy shit to happen. So we'll talk about Dallas and St. Louis first. And this is, I don't think, going to be very close. I thought that Dallas would win the first round series. It wouldn't be very close. It ended up being 6 games, which is kind of a surprise to me. But it didn't end up being a very close series in the end. And they play St. Louis, who just had an amazing, not come from behind, amazing third period rally to beat the Chicago Blackhawks after almost blowing a first round series for another year in a row, where they had, I believe, a 3-1 lead. I think it was 3-1, and they lost 2 straight and almost lost. There was a good chance of them losing that game 7. So they're coming off a big momentum win for that entire franchise, and I think that St. Louis is going to beat Dallas. I don't think it's going to be a rollover. St. Louis is a much better defensive team. That was my problem with Dallas. Is I like Dallas watching throughout the year as a fan because they score a lot, but in the playoffs it's a whole different game, and I don't think that they have any chance in this kind of game that is super defensive, and you have to get extremely lucky. I think, and St. Louis isn't a city that's usually associated with the word luck, but I think they'll have enough to beat the Dallas Stars in this playoff matchup, just based on the edge defensively. And it will be a lot of work. You have a good chance of winning something whenever you have 2 of the 5 best players in the league. That's kind of the situation that the Thunder are in with the Spurs right now, which I'll talk about with Dalton later on in the week. But I think St. Louis is going to win this round. It's probably going to be a 6 or 7 game series, I would say. I could envision it being 5, though. I think Dallas will win a game at home, maybe 2. I don't think it'll be any more than that. So with that being said, let's move on to the next series, which is going to be Anaheim or Nashville versus San Jose. So given the level of uncertainty with Game 7s in any sport, honestly, any elimination game can go. It's just a Game 7. So it's a luck-based thing. I was trying to remember what the point I was making was. Anaheim or Nashville and San Jose. I think if Nashville wins, I think either team has a big chance to beat Anaheim or San Jose. I think San Jose is ready to implode. It's just something about San Jose gives me a bad feeling. And they won against the Kings, yeah, and they do have a different coach now. But I think the Sharks will beat the Predators. I don't think they'll beat the Ducks. I think that the Ducks, I want to say, have their number, but that's not the right phrase. I just think the Ducks are more motivated to beat the Sharks than the Predators would be, because they're different divisions. And the Predators have overachieved to this point just because they pushed Anaheim to 7, because as you can see from my really cool bubble where I thought that the Ducks would win in 5, I don't think anyone expected this series to get to this point. I don't think anyone wanted this. I don't think the NHL expected this series to get to this point, because They scheduled it later than all the other series, so it ended up in this situation where they play tonight, which is also the same night that round 2 starts for a team. So I don't even think the NHL expected the series to go this long. So that being said, I think that Anaheim will beat San Jose if it's Anaheim, and San Jose will win if it's Nashville, which would set up for a St. Louis and San Jose Western Conference final, which would be very interesting. But we'll move on to the Eastern Conference, and we'll talk about Tampa Bay and the New York Islanders. The Islanders overachieved to this point. I picked the games correctly, but not the winner. I don't think anyone expected Florida to come out as flat and as really bad as they actually were. Lightning are a surprising team. I forgot to factor into my prediction that every playoff run, or both, I guess, last playoff run and this playoff run, because he didn't play before that, the Kucherov-Johnson line, whoever's that third guy, because I don't think it's been Palat lately, they just all step up their game for a series, and they really raise their game in the playoffs. And that was something that I just didn't factor in, and that makes them a lot scarier of a team, even without Steven Stamkos, who I believe returned to skating recently. And the Islanders can call this a successful season because a lot of people expected them to be a rollover in the first round. They played really bad in the second half of the season, and I think, and a lot of it was, it's just, what happened to the team was really weird to watch unfold because they were good for like half the year and then they just randomly stopped winning. And I don't know what it was. I don't know how or why it happened, but the Islanders just turned into a different team at some point during the season, and it's looking like they're back to that form that they were at in the earlier parts of the season, where they're playing sound defensively, they're playing decent defensively, and they're getting just enough offense to win games, and they're not making dumb mistakes like they were in the second half of the season when I did watch a few of their games. So I don't think that they'll win this series. However, I think that they'll make it pretty close, just with the talent level, because there's going to be games where Tavares is just better than everyone else. There's just going to be a game or two like that where he just completely dominates it, not in like the score sheet necessarily, but he's going to get a lot of good scoring chances, and he's going to make some great passes. He's just going to be better than everyone else for a couple games this series, I think, anyway, if he's truly a superstar, even though I don't think he's a superstar. He is still a very good player. I don't think they'll be an easy opponent by any stretch of the imagination, but Tampa Bay, I think, will win, and it'll be just about the worst opponent for the Washington Capitals, who I think will win this series against the Pittsburgh Penguins. Washington tried to do something last series that I totally called and totally thought was going to happen, which is they tried to blow it at the very end, and they had a game 5 where they got outshot, or they outshot the Flyers 44-11 and lost by 1 goal, 1-0, and then immediately the next game they won 1-0. So a lot of the old Washington Demons are still there, and I'm really worried about this Pittsburgh Penguins team. They've been playing really hot lately. Malkin did kind of kill their chemistry when he came back in the Rangers series, and I wasn't the only one to notice that. A lot of people said that the team played different with Malkin than when they just had Crosby. So we'll see how that plays out. I think it will be a very close series, unlike the Penguins' first-round series. I think the Caps are... I don't remember how they did against the Capitals this year, but I remember last year they just got obliterated, and I think they only scored 1 goal against Holtby all year. Any of their 4 matchups, I believe they only scored 1 goal against Braden Holtby, and I don't remember the stats this year because I haven't been watching the team, because the same thing happened to me with the Capitals this year as last year when I was following the Knicks, this year too, where there was a point where they were too good, you knew they were just going to be a playoff team, so you just stopped watching. And the opposite case being with the Knicks, where they're out of the playoffs and there's no point in watching the team at all. It goes both ways for bad teams and overly good teams that aren't going to break records. Because after I knew that Washington wasn't going to get 60 wins, I was following the situation, and I was like, yeah, if they get closer to 60 wins, to get like 57, I'll probably start watching. But then they just decided to blow the last stretch of the season. So I think the Penguins won't be a rollover. I don't think there's any bad opponents in the second round. Like, if for instance, the Rangers had somehow won their first round series, I think that would be a rollover for the Caps. Or if the Predators won and faced the Kings, that would be a rollover, I think, just based on talent level. But I guess the Predators are the only realistic shot of that happening, but the Kings didn't even play well in the first round. So I think that the Caps will face off against the Caps will beat the Flyers, the Penguins. Too many Pennsylvania teams. All right, so that will set up for an Eastern Conference final of the Tampa Bay Lightning and Washington Capitals. And if that is the case, I think that Tampa Bay will win. And that's not based on any real reasoning or logic. That's just me having a gut feeling that the Capitals would lose in an Eastern Conference final in a year where they were vastly better than everyone else. And it would be Tampa Bay, Anaheim, and I think Tampa Bay will win the series, even with as injured as they are. As many problems they've been dealing with, they have enough, I think. And I don't know if it was just playing against Detroit that gives me that feeling, but that's my updated bracket. So, with that being said, that'll do it for the round 2 pod. We'll come back for a conference final pod, and I'll go a lot more in depth about the specifics. Then I didn't really talk about matchups or anything in this round, or key players or keys to a series or anything like that. In the conference finals is really where I clamp down, this round, the semis, is really where I start clamping down and trying to watch every game and analyze everything to the fullest extent. And I do this with the NBA too, where it's just once the second round starts, there's a lot less to pay attention to because there's only 4 games, or there's only 4 series happening rather. So it's a lot easier to consume everything than in round 1. And also, round 1's kind of a wash because random shit happens every year. And you saw it already this year happen. So look at my bracket. Look how bad it is. I should have filled out a new one, but whatever. I don't think you can at this point, even if it's like a one that's already full or filled out for the first round. So that'll do it for this round, and we'll see you for the conference finals. Talk to you then.